My name is Bailey Seymour, and this is my second linguistics video about my field experience at my elementary school. There have been some new developments since I checked in with you guys last, the most important of which being that we are moving to a new classroom in the school, so any spare time that we have had in between classes that I've spent at the school, I've been helping my home teacher move all of her stuff to a much smaller classroom, and it's been pretty crazy for her and for me. Other than that, not a lot has changed. We're doing similar activities. The students are working a lot on their grammar books, which are these little workbooks that Miss Gifford has them put together. They're kind of like this cutout thing that has some sections for verbs, and they have to write down verbs and other parts of speech, and they have fun little things to color, a really fun way for the kids to interact. And yeah, that's other than that, things are going as usual. My experience as an assistant hasn't changed much versus my experience as an observer. Miss Gifford likes to run her classroom the way that she likes to have it run. And so she's definitely still in charge of everything. And for the most part, there isn't much homework to check. So she doesn't have me really do much of that. But she has me help her around the classroom with little things, or like, helping the students to glue things down in some cases, or if they need help spelling a word, to help them with that. Um, or to help move things around the classroom, take some things down, put like new like art projects that the students have worked on up on the walls, stuff like that. Sometimes, if there really isn't anything going on, I'll just sit down and observe again, because sometimes she'll be just on her computer, while the students do other things, do the activities that they're assigned. Although normally we're watching them pretty sharply, especially the younger students, just to make sure that everything's going all right. The older ones can sometimes be trusted to do fairly well on their own, but there's a few troublemakers, and we kind of have to watch for some particular dynamics and some of the students, who are more prone to um, causing a little bit of havoc every now and again. Oh, and also there's a lot of paperwork to be done at the school. I guess there's a lot of flyers that need to get sent home to families, or a lot of papers that have to be filled out about students who were in the past enrolled in our ELS, or I believe it's called ELD at the school program, but have since moved on from it and are now no longer seen as being at a language level where they have to be taken separately and taught ESL. So we have to fill out paperwork regarding those students and how their homeroom teachers think that they're faring. So I do help her with all of the forms that she has to fill out, which are crazy. It's a huge amount. I had no idea. I think the most valuable thing that I have learned so far in my field experience about language learners is that, especially for children, they're most motivated when they don't realize that they're learning at all. So the children are most motivated by games, and even if the games don't involve, even if the games aren't language oriented, which a lot of our games are, all of the games that we allow them to play in the classroom are, but even if they weren't, I think that would be the most motivating thing for them, because each one of them, for the most part, comes from a different country. But they're children, and they're people, they're social. And so they all want to interact with each other. And of course, they each have their own native languages. But the one that they have in common, that they're learning here together, is English. So in order to communicate with each other, they have to use English by default. So I think the most valuable thing that I've really observed is that if you get them interacting with each other, and you can kind of stay there as a mediator, and make sure that they're children, so you have to make sure that things don't get too out of control, because they can. But B, and you can mediate their language a little bit and say, oh, you shouldn't say it like that. The correct way to say it would be like this. But you let them do their own thing, and they'll engage in so much production, and they'll be so much better than anything that they would have been had they only been doing just regular like classwork, sitting down and writing sentences, which of course is a valuable skill in and of itself. But I think the best way for them to learn is to just let them be themselves with each other. I think the most valuable thing that I've learned about teaching language learners too is to let them be themselves. Of course, you need time to just sit down and teach them new words and new concepts about grammar that they might not have ever, come to understand on their own just by living in the environment that they live in. But for the most part, they're going to be self-motivated. In most cases. There are some cases, there are a lot of children at my school who have parents who perhaps are going to the university, often the U, and they're learning English because they live here for the time being, but after their parent graduates from university or does who knows what, they're going to be traveling back to their home country, their native country, for perhaps the rest of their life. And those children aren't as motivated as some of the other children. And for them, it's hard. You have to push them a little further to find their motivation. And that's similar to how students in other countries act in regards to learning English, I've found, because I did foreign exchange for a while and I in Japan, and I saw how unmotivated a lot of the Japanese students were just because they found English to be incredibly hard, and a lot of them deemed it to be an impossible task to learn it. But when students here in America who learn English every day just by living here and have a practical use for it every day are far more motivated. And I think if you can help students to find their motivation, that's the best way to teach them a language, because honestly, I don't think there's any way to learn a language if you don't want to learn it. And sometimes your students aren't going to want to learn it just on their own. So the most valuable thing that you can do for them is to help them find motivation, even if it's just for that day, even if it's just about, they want to talk about fashion or video games or whatever it is that interests them. If you can just get them talking about like their favorite movie, like there was a girl who wanted to talk all about Finding Nemo with me. And if I could just get her talking about that, it got her producing so much more English than anything else. She might not have been speaking English just because she wanted to speak English that badly, but she just wanted to talk about the movie. So if you can help them find their motivation on a large scale for the language, but even just on a smaller scale for the day-to-day topics, that's more valuable than anything I think we could ever do for them otherwise. One thing that occurred in the classroom that reminded me of what we're doing now with breaking down sentence structures and noun phrases and verb phrases and prepositional phrases and the ambiguity that can result from how you structure a sentence was the other day in class we were doing an exercise where it was focusing on prepositions, of course. They had little whiteboards, each of the students did, and they were reading sentences, and they had to draw on their whiteboard what the sentence described. And they're fairly simple sentences, but they're ordered in such a way like the tree behind the house, or let's see, I think it might have been the tree next to the house was big. Now, for me, you and I, that's a pretty easy sentence to understand. And I would have never thought that it might have been a little ambiguous, but for some students who didn't quite understand the ordering of how prepositional phrases are separate in the middle of a sentence, it was difficult. There was one student in particular who I remember for exactly that sentence, the tree next to the house was big. The mistake that she continually made with sentences structured like that was that she would assume that the adjective at the end of the sentence applied to the noun inside of the prepositional phrase in the middle of the sentence. Meaning that she would have said that instead of drawing a big tree next to a house, she would have drawn a regular sized tree of any size next to a big house, because she associated that adjective, big, with the closest noun, house, which you can see how she might do that, but in reality, of course, it was incorrect. And it was something that I had never considered before, but thinking about each of the phrases and how ambiguous that might have been to her, it made a lot more sense. And we tried to explain it to her over and over again, but each time she just didn't quite understand. She was it was interesting, especially because she was one of the students in the class who has the best production. Yet some of the little concepts like that were still difficult for her. This concludes my video on my experience. Thank you for watching.